Dad perfect events. I was standing in my garage workshop, fixing Linda's old jewelry box when my son-in-law Tony walked in and said the words that changed everything. "Charlie, we've been talking. You'd be safer in one of those assisted living places. We found a nice one across town." I set down my screwdriver and looked at him. This was my house, my workshop, my life for the past 31 years. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name is Charles Foster. Most folks call me Charlie. I'm 58 years old, retired engineer from the power company. And for 4 years now, I've been living alone in the house Linda and I built together on Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio. Linda died of a heart attack in 2020, and after that it was just me, this house, and the memories we made here. Linda was everything to me. We met at Ohio State when I was studying engineering, and she was getting her teaching degree. She had this laugh that could fill up a room, and she made the best apple pie in 3 counties. We were married. 28 years when her heart gave out. One minute she was watering her tomatoes in the backyard, next minute she was gone. The doctors said it was quick, that she didn't suffer, but that didn't make the quiet any easier to handle. After Linda passed, I threw myself into my workshop projects. That's where I'd built Jenny's cradle when she was born, where Linda and I refinished the dining room table we bought at an estate sale. The smell of sawdust and machine oil became my therapy. I'd work on small repairs for neighbors, fix clocks, restore old furniture. It kept my hands busy and my mind from wandering too far down dark roads. In 2019, my daughter Jenny called me up, crying. Her husband Tony's real estate business had tanked during a market downturn. They were behind on rent, and could they maybe stay with me for a while? Jenny's my only child, and I wasn't about to let her sleep in her car. "Come on over," I told her. "This place is too big for one person anyway." That was my first mistake. Not helping my daughter, that was never a mistake. The mistake was not asking harder questions about Tony Phillips. Tony is what you'd call a smooth operator, real estate agent, always dressed sharp in those expensive button-downs, always had an explanation for everything. He drove a BMW that was 2 years behind on payments, but he kept it polished like a mirror. The first few months weren't bad. He helped with yard work when I asked, pitched in on groceries sometimes. We watched football on Sundays and he'd bring beer. I thought maybe this arrangement could work out. Jenny seemed happy enough those first months. She got a job at the local hospital as a nurse practitioner, started bringing home steady money again. She'd cook dinner on weekends, and we'd sit around the table like a real family. It reminded me of the old days when Linda was still here, and Jenny would come over with her college boyfriend, back when life felt simpler. But by year 2, things started changing, in ways that were hard to pin down at first. Tony began rearranging my workshop without asking. He'd move my tools to better locations and organize my lumber pile because the old system was inefficient. When I put things back where I wanted them, he'd move them again the next week. He moved Linda's picture from the mantel to a shelf in the hallway, said it was better feng shui for the living room. When I moved it back, he moved it again. He started referring to the house as our place when talking to his real estate clients on the phone. I'd hear him out in the backyard, bragging about our property and our investment potential. He complained about my TV being too loud during the evening news, said my coffee was too strong when he helped himself to it every morning, criticized the hours I kept. "Charlie, normal people don't get up at 5:30 a.m., he'd say. Normal people. Like I was some kind of oddball for keeping the same schedule I'd maintained for 30 years. Jenny said nothing during these conversations. My daughter, who used to argue with her high school principal about unfair detention policies, who once got suspended for defending a kid being bullied, just went quiet whenever Tony got controlling. By year 3, Tony had stopped knocking before coming into my room. He'd walk right in to check if I needed anything or to make sure the heater was working properly. He'd comment on the state of my laundry, suggest I might want to update my wardrobe, recommend I consider modern solutions for everything from my coffee maker to my reading glasses. By year 4, he talked to me like I was some confused old man who couldn't handle his own affairs. He'd speak slowly, repeat things I'd already understood the first time, and explain basic concepts like I was a child. "Charlie, you know how credit cards work, right? You swipe them, and the money comes out of your account." I'd been managing money since before he was born, but pointing that out only made him pat my shoulder and smile, that patient smile reserved for the feeble-minded. I kept my mouth shut and watched. That's something 30 years of engineering teaches you. Observe the problem completely before you try to fix it. Document the patterns. Understand what you're dealing with. I was dealing with something, but I wasn't sure what yet. The breaking point came in ways I never could have predicted. Then in March of 2024, I did something I'd never done before. I bought lottery tickets. Not because I was desperate. I'm not that kind of guy. My neighbor Pat Miller dared me to at the Speedway on Route 161, and it was just $4 for 2 tickets. Sometimes at 58 you do foolish things just to feel like anything's possible. Pat Miller has been my neighbor for 15 years. She's 61, drives a pickup truck older than some marriages, fixes her own plumbing, and has zero patience for nonsense of any variety. She was Linda's closest friend, and after Linda passed, Pat made it her business to check on me regularly. Not in a hovering way, but in the practical way of bringing over extra tomatoes from her garden and making sure I wasn't living on cereal and regret. That Tuesday afternoon, Pat and I were at the gas station filling up our vehicles when she noticed the lottery sign. "Charlie, you ever play the numbers? Never saw the point. Come on, live a little. What's the worst that could happen? You're out $4 and you get to dream about telling Tony where to stick his feng shui advice." She had a point. I bought 2 tickets from the same machine, same transaction, sequential numbers printed on thin paper that seemed too flimsy to hold anyone's future. On impulse, when I got home and Tony was grabbing his usual beer from my fridge without asking, I handed him one of the tickets. "Here, maybe you'll get lucky," I said. He took it without looking up from his phone, mumbled something that might have been thanks, and stuffed it in his wallet next to his maxed-out credit cards. I forgot about it. 3 weeks later, everything changed. I was in my workshop early on a Saturday morning, trying to fix a neighbor's antique clock, when I heard shouting from the house. Not angry shouting, excited shouting. Then Tony burst through the workshop door with his phone in one hand and that lottery ticket in the other. "Charlie, Charlie, look at this. 5 numbers plus the bonus ball. $75 million. He was jumping around my workshop like a kid on Christmas morning, waving that piece of paper like it was made of gold. His face was flushed red, and he kept repeating the number. 75 million, Charlie. 75 million. Jenny appeared in the doorway behind him, still in her bathrobe, looking stunned. "Dad, is this real?" I looked at the ticket Tony was holding, then at the Ohio Lottery website he'd pulled up on his phone. The numbers matched. My $2 impulse gift had just changed everything. The house turned into something I didn't recognize within hours. There were phone calls to lawyers, financial advisors, tax specialists. Tony strutted around like he'd just conquered a small country, making appointments and talking about investment strategies and wealth management. He bought new clothes that afternoon, expensive shirts and shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. By evening, he'd already started making plans. "We'll need to upgrade everything," he told Jenny, while I sat at my kitchen table trying to process what had happened. New cars, new furniture, maybe a bigger place. This house is nice, but it's not exactly $75 million lifestyle material. Jenny nodded along, caught up in the excitement. They talked about vacation homes and European trips while I drank my coffee and watched my own home get mentally redecorated around me. Within a week, Tony had hired a team. Nicholas Cooper, attorney from Cleveland with a suit that cost more than my car. A financial advisor who drove up from Cincinnati in a Mercedes. An accountant who spoke only in tax code and investment portfolios. They held meetings in my living room, spreading papers across the coffee table Linda and I had bought at a flea market 20 years ago. Tony bought new furniture without asking me. A leather couch to replace Linda's floral sofa. A glass coffee table that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When I said I preferred the old furniture, he patted my shoulder. "Charlie, you'll get used to the upgrade. This is quality stuff." He talked about investments and properties and our future with Jenny, but somehow that never seemed to include me. I was relegated to observer status in my own home, watching strangers plan a future that apparently didn't require my input. The changes weren't just financial. Tony's attitude shifted completely. The man who'd been deferential and grateful for a place to stay suddenly acted like he owned everything he touched. He rearranged my garage without permission, claiming he needed proper storage for important documents. He moved Linda's picture again, this time to a closet shelf, saying the living room needed to reflect our new status. When I objected, he got that patient tone again. "Charlie, I know change is hard at your age, but you have to trust that I know what's best for all of us. This money is going to take care of everyone, including you." The phrase "at your age" became his favorite weapon. Everything I said or did was filtered through this lens of my supposed incapacity. If I disagreed with his decorator choices, it was because I couldn't adapt to modern style. If I questioned his financial decisions, it was because I didn't understand contemporary investment strategies. If I wanted my house to stay the way Linda and I had made it, it was because elderly people resist necessary change. Jenny went along with all of it. My daughter, who'd once defended every underdog she met, nodded and smiled while her husband systematically erased everything familiar from the space where she'd grown up. When I tried to talk to her privately, she'd say things like, "Dad, Tony knows about money. We should let him handle this." 3 weeks after the lottery win, I realized I'd become a tenant in my own home, and not a particularly welcome one. That Tuesday morning, when Tony walked into my workshop and delivered his ultimatum about assisted living, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. The kind of clarity you get when someone finally says out loud what they've been thinking all along. "This is my house," I said, setting down my screwdriver. Something flashed across his face. Surprise, maybe, that I wasn't just rolling over. "Not for much longer, old man. We don't need you anymore." Jenny agrees. "You're becoming a safety hazard to yourself." He walked out of my workshop, where I'd built Jenny's dollhouse when she was 7, where Linda and I had refinished furniture for 20 years, where I'd taught myself to repair clocks because I liked the precision of making broken things work again. I stood there for a long minute, surrounded by the tools I'd collected over 3 decades, breathing in the familiar smell of sawdust and WD-40. Then I smiled, because Tony had made one catastrophic mistake. He'd never asked me about the other lottery ticket. I went to my bedroom and sat on Linda's side of the bed. That's where I always went when I needed to think straight. Her perfume smell was long gone, but the habit stuck, and sometimes habit is all that holds you together when everything else is shifting. I sat there and let myself feel the fear first. That's important. You got to acknowledge what scares you before you can deal with it. I was 58, retired on a pension of $2,400 a month. I drove a 2016 Honda Civic with 160,000 miles on it and a slow leak in the left rear tire. The 2 people I'd housed and fed for 5 years had just told me my time was up. With $75 million, they could make my life hell even, without legal grounds. Tony already knew property law from his real estate days. He could claim I was mentally incompetent, unsafe, unable to maintain the property. He could contest my ability to live independently. Money changes the rules of any fight, and rich people can afford lawyers who know how to use those rules. But here's what Tony didn't know, and what his expensive Cleveland attorney couldn't advise him about. I still had the other lottery ticket. I got up and went to Linda's old desk, the roll top that came from her father's house in Akron. Bottom drawer, in a white envelope behind her collection of sympathy cards I'd never had the heart to throw away, was lottery ticket number 1. Same drawing, same purchase, same receipt still folded in my wallet, showing the $4 charge to my debit card. In Ohio, if you bought the tickets, you own the winnings, unless there's signed paperwork saying otherwise. Tony had a piece of paper I gave him as a casual gift. He didn't have a transfer agreement, a witnessed gift document, or anything else that would hold up if someone wanted to challenge ownership. The ticket in my hand was worth $75 million, and Tony's lawyer didn't even know it existed. I needed help, and I needed it from someone who wouldn't try to keep the peace or make excuses for family harmony. I called Pat Miller. Pat answered on the first ring. "Charlie, you never call this early unless something's wrong?" "Something's wrong," I said, and told her everything. The workshop conversation, Tony's threats about assisted living, the $75 million, the second ticket sitting in my desk drawer. When I finished, Pat was quiet for about 10 seconds. "You need a lawyer. My son Brad handles property and family law in downtown Columbus. He's good, and he doesn't waste time. Can I call him today?" "Yes." "Don't tell Tony or Jenny anything, not one word. If they ask where you're going, you're visiting a friend or running errands. Can you do that?" I'd been an engineer for 30 years, dealing with contractors and inspectors who'd try to shortcut safety protocols if you weren't watching. I said, "I can keep a secret from a real estate agent." Pat laughed, and for the first time that day, my chest didn't feel so tight. 2 days later, I drove to Columbus. I told Jenny I was meeting an old work buddy for lunch, which was close enough to true that I didn't feel like I was lying. She barely looked up from her laptop, where she was browsing luxury vacation rentals in the Bahamas. Brad Miller had his office on High Street, fourth floor of a building that had seen better decades but was solid where it counted. He was 35, methodical, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of family crisis and wasn't impressed by any of them anymore. I put the lottery ticket and gas station receipt on his desk and explained the situation without sugarcoating anything. Brad studied both items carefully, turning the receipt over to check the timestamp and card. Details. This receipt shows 2 tickets, sequential numbers, purchased with your debit card at 2:47 p.m. on March 15th. In Ohio, unsigned lottery tickets are bearer instruments. Ownership is based on possession and purchase evidence. You gave your son-in-law a ticket as a gift, but the gift of physical paper and the gift of associated winnings are different legal questions. Does that eliminate my claim? Not necessarily. Gift law is complicated when large sums are involved. But if he files his ticket for processing before we take legal action, the Lottery Commission will release the funds and recovery becomes much harder. He paused, checking his computer screen. How long do we have? His lawyer is still working on tax structure and setting up investment accounts. Maybe 10 days, 2 weeks at most. Then we file today. Brad prepared the legal notice that afternoon, a formal document asserting my ownership interest in both lottery tickets and requesting that the Ohio Lottery Commission hold off on any prize disbursement pending dispute resolution. By 4 p.m., the letter was sent by certified mail with electronic filing to make sure it got there fast. They're going to be angry, Brad said as he walked me to my car. I know. Are you safe at home? I thought about it honestly. Tony's not violent. He's calculating, manipulative, but not dangerous physically. Jenny would never hurt me. But they're going to be furious. I drove home in the late afternoon light, past cornfields going brown and suburban developments where people were living normal lives without lottery tickets and family betrayals. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not fear, but clarity. I'd planted my flag. Now I'd see who tried to pull it up. I was still hanging up my coat when Tony appeared in the hallway. He was holding his phone, and his expression had moved past anger into something colder and more calculating. We need to talk. Jenny appeared behind him, looking like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. I walked into the living room and sat in my recliner, the one piece of furniture Tony hadn't managed to replace yet. We got a call from our attorney, Tony said, working hard to keep his voice controlled. The Lottery Commission received a legal notice claiming competing ownership of my ticket. In your name. That's right. The 2 words hit harder than he expected. Charlie, Jenny's voice was strained. What are you doing? That was a gift. You gave Tony that ticket. I gave him a piece of paper worth $2. I didn't sign a transfer agreement for any winnings. I have the purchase receipt showing. Both tickets came from the same transaction on my debit card. Tony leaned forward, and now his composure was cracking. This is a legal stunt. You're trying to steal money that belongs to us. I looked at him steady. You told me 2 days ago to pack my things and leave my own house. You said you don't need me anymore. I decided to take your advice and stop being generous. The room went dead quiet except for the sound of Tony's breathing getting heavier. Then his voice dropped into a register I'd never heard before. Charlie, you have no idea what you're starting. We have resources now, real resources. We can tie this up in litigation for years. We can file counterclaims. At your age, a judge might be very interested in whether you're mentally competent to make sound legal decisions. He let that hang there like a threat. Or we can make this go away right now. You drop the legal notice, we give you a generous monthly allowance, and you stay in the house as long as you want. Comfortable. Taken care of. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd lived in my house for 5 years, eaten my food, used my utilities, and was now offering to pay me to live in my own home. Number. Dad, Jenny moved closer, her voice breaking slightly. Please, we're family. This isn't worth destroying everything. You stood right here 2 days ago, while your husband told me to move to assisted living. You said nothing. You agreed with him. I looked at her steadily. I don't know what family means anymore, Jenny, but I know what this house means. It's mine. The Ohio Lottery Commission mediation was scheduled 3 weeks later. Conference room on the 7th floor of a state building in Columbus. Beige walls and fluorescent lights. And a mediator named Stephen Wilson, who spoke with the measured tone of someone who'd watched families destroy themselves over money. Tony arrived with Nicholas Cooper and a second attorney from Cleveland. I arrived with Brad Miller. The contrast was obvious. Tony in a $2,000 suit, looking like he was closing a corporate merger. Me in my best shirt from J.C. Penney, looking like what I was, a retired engineer fighting for his home. Cooper went first, smooth and professional, arguing the ticket was a clear gift and citing Ohio case law about informal transfers of property. Then Brad placed 3 documents on the table: the gas, station receipt, my bank statement, and Ohio Lottery Regulation 3770-1-9-8, requiring documented purchase evidence for disputed claims. Mr. Foster purchased both tickets with his debit card in a single transaction. There's no signed transfer document, no witnessed gift ceremony, no contemporaneous record establishing that beneficial interest passed from purchaser to recipient. When the mediator asked about my intent in giving the ticket, I said, I handed him a $2 piece of paper the same way I might give someone a stick of gum. I didn't think about winnings because there weren't any winnings yet. If I'd given him $2 cash that somehow became worth $75 million, nobody would argue the increase in value was part of the gift. That's when Tony made his fatal mistake. He leaned forward and his voice rose. This is ridiculous. He gave me the ticket, I won. End of story. He's trying to steal from his own family because we suggested he consider a safer living situation. This is spite, pure. Spite from an old man who can't handle change. The room went silent. Stephen Wilson put his glasses back on. Brad said nothing, didn't need to. Tony's outburst was now part of the official record. 5 days later, Brad called. The commission ruled in your favor. Without signed transfer documentation, they declined to process Tony's claim. After taxes, the prize came to $38 million. Tony and Jenny moved out within 3 weeks. They divorced 8 months later. Apparently $75 million was the only thing holding their marriage together. Jenny and I talk now, maybe once a month. Not like before, but honestly. More honestly than we had in years. I kept the house, had the workshop expanded, set up a scholarship fund at Ohio State for engineering students, named it for Linda. I even traveled some. Pat and I went to Ireland last fall. They say family is everything, and I still believe that. I just learned to read the word more carefully. Family isn't people who share your roof or your DNA. It's people who see you clearly and choose to stay anyway. What would you have done in my place? Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who will ask you to disappear the fastest when money shows up. But real strength isn't about the size of your bank account. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and fight for what's rightfully yours. I learned that you can't buy respect, but you sure can lose it for free. When someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time. And don't let anyone convince you that your home, your dignity, or your right to exist aren't worth defending.